defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Folks, it's time for us to take back control of our government now before this bureaucratic, oversized, and self-serving federal government starves us of our property, our freedom, our rights, and our liberty. But to do this, we must shed conventional thinking regarding our political structure. We need to be revolutionaries in thought, dissidents in action. Only after we recognize what our government is doing to our freedom and our Constitution will we start taking it back. And this program is just about that. Today we're pleased and honored to have a returning guest, Mr. Marc Hyden. He's the National Advocacy Coordinator with the Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty, a project of Equal Justice USA. And today we're going to talk about the death penalty and what strides have been made since we last spoke with him regarding eliminating the death penalty, from our judicial system. Marc, welcome back to Liberty Talk Radio.
Thanks for having me back on, Joe.
Yeah. May I start this with a philosophical note on a philosophical
I
note?
hope you will. I hope
Okay.
you will.
This whole death penalty bothers me. What higher power gave someone the right to kill someone else? I mean, most religions, maybe not all, but most religions have things like thou shalt not kill. At least I know in the Christian religions, thou shalt not kill. What is it about thou shalt not kill that people do not understand?
Well, I'm assuming that's a rhetorical question because it's kind of hard for me to answer for all of these different religions.
I recognize that. Yeah, but I'm just saying, but talking philosophically, it just bothers the hell out of me.
Well, and I completely understand that. And I think that's why we have so many people on the religious right that are coming out against the death penalty, especially those that are evangelical or Catholic, because they recognize that we're made in the image of God, and we shouldn't be trying to extinguish the image of God, which is what happens via executions. We also understand that despite the worst crimes that some people can commit, that's only one act, and they should have the rest of their life to find redemption and to turn life around. And many people have found redemption after committing a heinous murder. So I think you're speaking along the right vein of kind of the religious right and the change that we're seeing in Americans across the United States because of their spiritual views that's helping to change how they view the death penalty.
Yeah. Well, it's been my experience, and I've never done any research on this, but most conservatives are of the also religious right, if you will. They're also relatively religious. And I know this is an oversimplification, where when you find many people who are of no political affiliation or the left, they seem to be less religious, or at least when I say religious, that's a bad term, that's not accurate. I mean belonging to a particular religion. They may believe in God, but that they're not associated with any particular ideology. But so it surprises me that you have an organization that's conservatives concerned about the death penalty, when if they are the more, quote, religious group, if you want to characterize them, all right, they should be the least concerned because they should not be for the death penalty because the Bible says thou shalt not kill. Isn't there a conflict there within the organization?
Well, I'm a Christian. I'm very proud of that. I'm also a conservative, and I'm very proud of that. And it's in that order. I'm a Christian first before I'm a conservative. But I can tell you, I was recently in Oklahoma, in your home state, or at least your home state now, and I spoke to the Oklahoma Conservative Political Action Committee. And this is a group of religious right individuals. They take the Bible very seriously. And I presented the conservative case against the death penalty, and it was astounding, because I believe the majority of the people in that room supported the death penalty at the beginning, but by the end, many of them had moved. And the reason was our death penalty in practice is run nothing like it is, or like it's supposed to be in the Bible. There are a few verses that mandate, if you are going to have a capital punishment program, how it has to be run. But we don't follow any of those mandates. So I had several people come up to me afterwards and say, gosh, Mark, I want to support the death penalty. I want to support the biblical death penalty, but we are fallible. We don't run it like it would be or should be as laid out in the Bible. And also, we're humans, so our judgment is fallible, unlike God's perfect judgment. So we're seeing a lot of people on the religious right that are having that same journey that you were talking about, Joe.
We incarcerate people sometimes, depending on the judge and the circumstances and the amount of maybe marijuana that they have in their pocket at the time, may incarcerate someone from 6 months, 2 years, to several years in prison, and which is an incredibly harsh penalty for a non-crime. And on your previous episodes here with Liberty Talk Radio, you had mentioned that in many cases, people who are being defended on a case that may result in a death penalty, the person is poor, and of course they get a public defender that's overwhelmed with work, may not even know the case whatsoever. I mean, this is not what you see on television where the guy spends his whole 24 hours a day for months investigating the crime. He's lucky to read what the charges were when he gets to the courtroom. And of course, the other side may have a very good attorney, thus the person is more likely to get the death penalty. But it seems like our entire justice system, in addition to the death penalty, is kind of skewed in the wrong direction. I don't believe anyone has the right to take someone else's life. I mean, if we're saying that this person killed this person and that's wrong, why, because he's a judge, he can take the life of another person? That makes no moral sense whatsoever for me.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, and I would agree with you, and I want to respond to a couple things you said, because you're talking about the inequity of a criminal defense attorney who's publicly appointed defense versus the prosecution. And, I had a glass of wine recently with Ray Crone, and he was the 100th person who was released from death row because he was wrongly convicted, and it was based on DNA evidence, among other things. But in Arizona, he was sentenced to die, and he couldn't afford an attorney. He worked for the post office. He didn't have much money. He was lucky if he could afford a beer so he could go to the local bar and play some darts. But he has a right to an attorney. So what do? They gave him $5,000, and that is what he was allowed to spend on an attorney for the whole process. Meanwhile, the prosecution got paid way more than that. And they also spent, just on their forensic expert, just on that, they spent $50,000. 10 times as much as his complete defense was allowed to spend. So there is a grave issue of inequity when it comes to the defense versus the prosecution. But you also touched on something else when you were talking about maybe we're looking at criminal justice system wrongly, and I think you're absolutely right. We are very offender focused. You know who gets lost though? The victims and the victims' families. Repeatedly, this happens. There's a very nice lady whom I was able to cross paths with in Florida, and unfortunately her father he was against the death penalty, but he was murdered. And she was also struck in the head during the commission of the crime, but she wanted to make sure that the offender was not executed because her father didn't want that, and she didn't want to go through this long, murky process of appeals. But the prosecution told her, ma'am, we know what's best for you. Please keep your mouth shut. Yeah. So if you go on the stand and say you're against the death penalty, we're throwing you in jail. That's not what she wanted. That's not what was going to give her closure. Yet we had this offender-focused system in place, and it doesn't help murder victims' families. We know this.
Yeah. I can say, there used to be an old expression. I'm not sure. Maybe Sally knows, because Sally's 101 years old. She may remember this, but 106? I'm sorry. I don't remember exactly, maybe 110. But they just say, who died and left you God? I mean, there used to be an expression, right, Sally? There used to be an expression. We used it for everything, if someone did something, who died and left you God, And so I say, who died and left this person God?
Yeah, and that's right. But that's a system that we have in place. We give so much power to prosecutors to unilaterally decide whether or not they're going to seek death, and that's how it works in most states. So, yeah, it is essentially giving them godlike powers, the power to take a life, which is essentially what they've been bestowed upon these individuals. And, I believe most prosecutors are good people. I really do. But there are a few bad apples in that basket, and it spoils the whole bunch, as the saying goes. And, I can point to one in Texas. This prosecutor withheld exculpatory evidence, which would have prevented this person's conviction. And he knew he withheld it with malice, which makes it much, much worse. So this person spent 25 years in prison before it was discovered that the prosecutor had knowingly and with malice withheld this evidence. Well, they decided they had to release this guy from prison after 25 years, but they wanted to punish the prosecutor. So they gave him a $500 fine and said, you're going to spend 10 days in jail. So that is the justice system that we have now. It empowers some people with this godlike authority, but when they abuse it, it's a slap on the wrist.
All right. Now, what about the attorney himself or herself? They present the evidence to prove or attempt to prove that this person committed a heinous crime, right? And they do not appeal to the judge, requesting that if found guilty, this person should not get the death penalty. Many times they insist on the death penalty. So they're just as murderous as the judge and as the person, if he's guilty, as a person who committed a crime, at least in my humble opinion.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't go quite as far to call them murderers because I think there are some misconceptions. I think a lot of prosecutors believe that the death penalty does serve justice to murder victims' families, even though we know better because it's this long, drawn-out process of uncertainty and it's quite harmful. I believe that some of them think that it deters crime, but we know that's not true. We've seen the studies that have come out. We've seen that states, when they repeal the death penalty, the murder rates go down. So I think there are some justifications that they have for seeking death, but they're all specious. There's no, It doesn't hold water. These are very problematic arguments with a lot of holes in them, and we have the science on our side.
Yeah. Well, we have this death penalty, but the death penalty, in my opinion, seems to be the easy way out. That's a soft penalty in a way, because when you consider that if a person is in his middle years or 30s or 40s, whatever, and let's assume that they did commit a crime which involved murder and they were responsible for it, wouldn't a worse punishment be to serve life in prison? I mean, isn't that more of a punishment than giving the person a needle and say, go to sleep, guy, and you're gone?
I'm not sure. I mean, because I'm sitting here, so I've never experienced either, and I hope that I never do. I hope to God. But it depends on the individual. So in Pennsylvania, they've only executed 3 people in the modern era, and all 3 of those were volunteers. They wanted to get out of there however they could. But others also try to fight to survive. And I think there's something very human in that, to preserve your well-being as much as possible and try to live. But you're right, life without parole, foremost, I want to say it's very problematic. There are a lot of issues with life without parole. There are a lot of innocent people that are serving it because there's limited appeals that they have access to. But it's also a very nasty place to serve. I don't want to name this individual because we're friends, but he was serving life without parole before they found out he was innocent. He was stabbed 5 times while he was in there and contracted hepatitis because of the stab wounds. And he experienced untold other harms while in there. Yeah. And you have to look at a lot of these that plays into that calculus. So I don't know which one is worse. I wouldn't want to experience either of them.
Well, I'm not suggesting that we put them in a prison where they watch movies all day and have access to, whatever yards, and they can go farm or whatever they want to do and make work programs and whatever. In other words, make life wonderful for them. The only thing is they're subject to the state. I mean, put them in prison. That's not a nice place. I mean, to me, that is hell. So why don't you just make a person, experience hell on earth? There's your punishment. And I still go back, if the Bible says, and if most religions say, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not kill, Now, if my wife found me, doing something with another woman, she wouldn't kill me. She would just insist I mow the lawn twice a week. That would be hell to me.
Well, I'm not sure what penological purpose mowing the lawn would serve.
I hate mowing the lawn. That's the point.
Well, I happen to like mowing the lawn, so next time I'm in Oklahoma, I'll do you a solid and mow your yard for you. But when it comes to life without parole, I agree. I'm pro-life, and I mean that in the broadest sense of the term. And I think we ought not take life unless it's absolutely necessary. And in today's day and age, it's never necessary to execute someone because we have other options. The other options aren't great. I'll go ahead and tell you that, but we have other options that we could use. And some of them are pretty bad. You're talking about the hellish institution of life without parole, which can be very terrible. But I think in the end, we need to look at what objectives do we want to get by putting these people in jail, by executing them? Do we want to teach them a lesson? Do we want to protect society? And that's I think, the best place for us to move forward in having a criminal justice system that works best for everyone. And so we can also move away a little bit from this offender-focused system and start, redirecting some of the resources that are wasted on the death penalty, and maybe redirect that towards victims' families, because they are the forgotten people. They're the lone voices crying out in the wilderness, right. But almost nobody in the government is paying attention to them.
Yeah. Is there any of those that do not get the penalty? Are there provisions within that penalty that say that they have to do something to help support when I say support the family, but on a daily basis or weekly basis or whatever, provide some sort of restitution to the family? I don't know what form that would take, but are there programs such as that so they sort of pay back for what they've done?
Kind of. So not when it comes to the death penalty or to capital crimes, but there are lesser crimes where offenders are allowed to do some sort of work within the prison, and the money that they earn, which isn't much, they're able to pay restitution with that. Now, I know California and some other states have talked about repealing the death penalty and replacing it with a system of life without parole plus restitution where the offender does that. And they work to pay for their own room and board, and they work to try to take their step in the right direction in replacing what they took from the victim's family, which I think there's something more just in that. Right. It's not a perfect system, but there are other instances too. There was a man by the name of Ivan Telugus who was on death row in Virginia, and out of the goodness of his heart, he was the janitor for death row, even though he was serving on death row. He didn't get paid for it, but he wanted to give something back. And one of the scariest things about his case is he was likely wrongly convicted. And recently, 25 notable conservatives signed on to a letter begging Governor McAuliffe to commute his sentence, which he did, and I think it was conservatives that helped change his mind. But now he's serving life without parole, and we have to look to see how we can get someone like that a fair trial, a fair retrial, because by all measures, he was wrongly convicted.
Yeah. Well, I got a couple of questions. My problem is I ask one question, but then I forget the second one. I'll see if I can remember both. But why is your organization called Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty? Why not everyone concerned? All political groups concerned about the death penalty?
Well, there's a few ways to answer that. One, we wanted a space for conservatives and for libertarians. There are a lot of abolition groups out there that support repealing the death penalty, and I'm happy to work with them. I'm a bridge builder, and we've participated in coalitions together. But we found that conservatives, they like to have their own space. They're against the death penalty for different reasons than some of their counterparts on the left. So we created an organization where they can have a discussion, a candid discussion, a forum, if you will, on their concerns with the death penalty. So that's why we have it. And why is it concerned about the death penalty rather than against the death penalty? That's because we wanted to have a big umbrella. We want a larger organization. We don't want to say, all of us are against the death penalty, so if you're not against it, you can't participate with us, because we want to have open dialogue. So many of the people, I think, support the death penalty in theory, but they've learned that in practice it falls apart. So they come in as a conservative who's concerned about the death penalty. They can see potential merits, and I would argue against those merits in theory, but they see in practice it just doesn't work, and that's why they're happy to be with an organization, Conservatives Concerned.
Well, if you took a survey of conservatives, and I don't really know how you would do this, and I don't know how you would truly identify a conservative unless a person says, well, I'm a conservative, and I'll bet a good portion of the time they're really not certain what that means. But if you took whom you ever consider a conservative, what percent right now would you surmise are against the death penalty now? What percent?
Well, it depends how you ask the question. I mean, polls are notorious for that. You can sway it one way or the other by how you ask it. You know, everyone always points to the Gallup polls, and they say, do you support the death penalty, yes or no? Well, to me, that sounds like a theoretical question. So you might be able to say yes. But, you know, let's look at Oklahoma, where you live. Many people consider that to be one of the most pro-death penalty states in America. And understandably, you have a long sordid history with capital punishment. But Sooner Poll did a survey recently, about a year ago. What did they find? They found the plurality of Republicans in Oklahoma support repealing and replacing the death penalty with an alternative. So if you give them another option, conservatives are on board, and they love that.
Okay. All right. So is there a way for you to measure what kind of progress you're making? You know, 10 years ago, X percent were diehard for the death penalty, and now it's Y. You know, is there any numbers on that?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, it fluctuates, but support for the death penalty is near a 40-year low, and it's trending downward. Now, I suspect it's going to keep going in that direction, but there are other metrics too. Death sentences are also near a 40-year low because jurors are just not returning death sentences anymore. They don't want that, and that's the reason. You're seeing executions that are coming down to a 20 or a 40-year low as well, because I think administrators and legislators or governors, they don't want to have that stain on their state of pursuing executions. So that's going away as well. So the death penalty, by pretty much all metrics, is slowly dwindling. But if I have anything to do with it, I'm going to speed up that dwindling process considerably.
All right. Tell them if they don't vote to repeal the death penalty, they're going to have to deal with me. Okay?
Nobody wants that. You told me about the story in New York, so nobody wants that.
Do you think that one of the headwinds that you wind up getting experiencing is that I don't know how to say this, but we in a sense have been desensitized, maybe is the word, from killing people. We have drone attacks on other countries where we have not a convicted murderer or person, but a suspected terrorist, not convicted. And so we send a drone over, and of course the drone very rarely just kills that suspected terrorist. You know, the suspected terrorist may not even be there, and innocent men, women, and children are killed, and we say, well, that's we only call them collateral damage, so that's not all that bad. You know, I mean, it's not bad. What happened to Mark? Oh, there you are. You disappeared from the screen. Excuse me. You think our government actions and our government's lust to kill people overseas needlessly has made your case or your life a little bit more difficult?
No, I don't think so. I think most Americans, they view one as foreign policy and the other as domestic policy. But for me, I mean, my view is the same. We ought not be killing people unless it's absolutely necessary. And I believe in a just war theory. You know, and I find it abhorrent when I hear about drone strikes that, you know, kill these families or bridal processions after a wedding. And I find that highly problematic and abhorrent. But I don't think it's really lessened people's views. I mean, there's been strides that I think in the past have been taken with regards to the death penalty to make it seem like a sterile surgical process.
Yeah.
Because it's done using medical professionals, and it's done around midnight, so no one's awake at the time. And I think those have been strides that they've tried to make it look like it's not death anymore. But you know, what we're finding is we're seeing botched executions across the United States, and we're finding that even these medical professionals are making huge mistakes by, in Oklahoma, during that one execution, they injected the wrong drug. In fact, it wasn't even a drug. It was a chemical used to de-ice airport runways. Of course, it led to his death, but it was a horrific experience.
Yeah.
So this is what we have, and that's the direction that they're going in. But when it was discovered what the state of Oklahoma had done with these botched executions, there was an outcry. So I don't know that it's lessened our sensitivity towards death, but I think when we see these instances of botched executions and government malfeasance, the outcry is there, and I think Americans are ready to have a discussion about whether the death penalty should be in our future or not.
Yeah. Now, statistically, how are we doing? Which states have dropped the death penalty since we last spoke, or maybe the last year, however you want to frame it? And how many have it on the ballot to be voted on? And are you making more progress, or are you regressing at all?
No. I mean, so I think we talked about 6 months ago, maybe less. So there's been no change since then. So 19 states no longer have the death penalty. 31 states have it on the books, but I'll caution you, because if you look at last year, only 5 states executed anyone. So most of those states just don't use it.
Yeah.
Now, the next round of voting, I know of no ballot initiatives that are coming up yet, although that could happen in the coming years. But I can tell you that just in the past 2 legislative cycles, there have been Republicans from 12 different states that have sponsored repeal legislation. So I think there's a lot of promise there. And when you look at my group, we have state-based conservatives concerned about the death penalty groups, and they've launched in a dozen states, and I suspect that number is going to reach 15 in the near future. So we're seeing a lot of positive change, and I think that if we keep doing what we're doing, we'll see some great results in the near future.
Yeah. What is your biggest obstacle right now?
Our biggest obstacle is always the same. It's educating people, because there are so many misconceptions when it comes to the death penalty. A lot of people think that innocent people never get caught up in it. They also think it saves money, but we know it's more expensive than life without parole. And I already mentioned murder victims' families. They think it serves justice to them, and they also think that it protects society by deterring crime. So it's about educating people, showing them the facts, letting them hear about anecdotes, letting them meet people that have been caught up in this terrible system. So that's our biggest obstacle. There's only one of me and the few others that work for Conservatives Concerned, so we're trying to go out there and educate as many people as possible.
Yeah. Do you think America, again, I'm asking the same question again, I guess, but, because of the, every night on the news you hear about us strategically bombing an area or someone who is suspected, you think America has become, or the average person is becoming desensitized to this, saying, well, it's sort of okay to kill?
I'm not quite sure if that leads some people to view that. I hear the phrase collateral damage thrown around an awful lot, but it's this. We should be progressing to a place where we're not having to deal with that. We should be have the moral high ground to where we're not dealing with that as well. I mean, if you're risking innocent lives unnecessarily, I don't see what purpose that's really serving. And the same goes for the death penalty. Innocent lives are hung up in that all the time. 159 people have been released from death row because they were wrongly convicted. Many others have been executed who might have been innocent as well. And is that the kind of collateral damage that you think they'd find acceptable? Well, some may, but I don't know why, because it serves no purpose and it doesn't benefit society in any way.
Yeah. So if we had to compare the United States in the context of the executing people compared to all the other countries, how do we rank?
Well, we're pretty high. I don't remember the statistics from last year, but we're in the top 5. And it's hard to compare states because we have different criminal justice systems. We have different options as well, penologically speaking. But yeah, we're pretty high, and it tends to be, we're put in a list with a lot of countries that we wouldn't emulate. I'll just leave it at that. Right. We're talking about other countries, Iran, some Middle Eastern countries, and some former Soviet bloc, I'm sure. So there's probably not the best company to keep.
I would assume Saudi Arabia is pretty high up there, isn't it? I mean, Saudi Arabia, they have a death penalty.
There's something really interesting about their system, and I'm against the death penalty, so I don't support executions at all. But they give an opportunity to the murder victims' families. When they bring the person forward who's about to be executed, they will say, in front of the crowd, they're like, if you want this person to go free, if you've forgiven them, we won't execute them. And whenever the family says that and they show that kind of clemency, the crowd just goes wild for this love that they've showed, this kind of forgiveness. So they do have a death penalty, but it operates much, much differently than ours, and it shows the beauty of forgiveness and clemency as well.
Why don't we do that?
Well, I just want to repeal the death penalty. It's entirely.
I mean, if you can't repeal it, could you throw that in as an option?
I've never had that discussion with a legislator. I'm not sure how that talk would go, but It's an option, I guess.
You tell him Joe from Harlem said he suggested that, and don't mess with him, all right? All right.
I'll make sure he knows.
Yeah, his website is Joey Popcorn from Harlem. That's how you can reach me. No, but seriously, we should do. Anyway, I find the subject quite frankly fascinating. I don't study it, but I find it fascinating only from a moral and philosophical point of view. And too often we take what we think is a pragmatic point of view. Well, they're bad people, and they may, come here and kill us, so we're going to go there and kill them first. We've had this mentality of preemptive strike, first strike, and killing people that have nothing to do with the problem at hand at all, or our perception of the problem, collateral damage. I love that title, And to me, we've become desensitized to it in a peripheral manner, and that bothers me as a nation. And it bothers me because these bum crooked politicians, and I put 90% of them in that category. Whenever they get up, they're always talking about God and Jesus, and they throw in the religious element, but yet they'll be for the death penalty or for preemptive bombing or whatever, and I find that despicable.
Sure, and you reminded me of something. You talked about killing the bad guys, and we always talk about the people that are wrongly convicted, the innocent people that get caught up in this system. But there's more than that, because there are some bad people who are sentenced to die. But I sat down with a Christian friend of mine, and he's also a painter, and he told me, confided in me, he said, I'm against the death penalty, Mark. And he pointed to this huge painting that covered a whole wall that he had done. And he said, I made one or two mistakes in there. But as you're painting, there's maybe 1 million strokes in a painting. If you make one mistake, do you throw that painting away? No, because the painting is not done yet, and there's more beauty that can come out of this. And the same goes for the death penalty. Some of these people may have committed a very heinous act. We can protect society by secluding them from the greater society, but still give them the opportunity to attain forgiveness or redemption and become a Christian or whatever. There's a lot more to their life, and there's good that many of them can give back to society.
Right. I agree. Well, do you have any projections as to when you think this will finally get resolved and we won't have the death penalty anymore and we'll all be on the same page? Is there any goal or anything like that your organization
Joe,
has?
if I could tell the future, I would be buying lottery tickets every day. So I have no idea. It's hard to read the tea leaves. It really is. I think we're progressing. We'll get there eventually. I think we're on the winning side. We have the science and the facts behind us. When we'll get there, I just don't know. But I would say keep an eye on Utah, keep an eye on Kansas, because they may be the next states to repeal the death penalty, and they're very red states too, so it would make me very happy.
Okay. Well, I tell you, if you send me enough money, I'll give you that answer, okay?
Thank you, I appreciate
Sally,
that.
did you have a question?
Yes.
Sally has a question.
Yes, Mark, can you hear me? There we
I
go.
can.
I was wondering, what steps do you have to take with the Oklahoma government, for example, to actually repeal this? I mean, what's the red tape you have to go through? Because obviously we have organizations like yours and others, and it takes all of these groups to do what? What are we? Do you have to bribe the politicians? What?
No, and I am. I'll go ahead and go on the record that I'm anti-bribery.
Okay.
I don't think I should have to go there.
Good.
No, but so we've got a group of conservatives in Oklahoma. Marvin Goodman, who's a Republican county commissioner, has been very outspoken. He and many others. But we're taking some of the first steps in Oklahoma because it's going to take more than that, because they need to be working with the state legislators, because it has to pass, repeal has to pass through the House, and it has to pass through the Senate, and then it goes to the governor's desk. And we've got to get a governor in there as well, who we'd like to be able to talk with. So that's the red tape, or it's just normal, how normal bills are passed or not. So that's what we have to go through.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Mark, if my wife ever says something like, "Do that one more time, I'll kill you," I'll say, "Call Mark," right? I'll have her call you. Okay? No, my wife's a sweetheart. I'm only saying that because my wife's a really veritable angel. I mean, she really is wonderful. That's why I can say this, because it's, if she heard me, she wouldn't even get mad. She'd laugh, but she wouldn't hurt a fly, unlike me. But, they say opposite attract, Mark, let me give you the last couple of minutes and just to wrap things up and tell our audience about your organization or anything else that you'd like to say.
Yeah, well, we're just a national network of conservatives and libertarians who believe the death penalty is inconsistent with our values of valuing life and promoting fiscal responsibility and limited government. So if any of your listeners want to be involved in whatever state that they live in, but be involved with us, or they want more information, or they have some concerns that they want to share, have them email me. It's info@conservativesconcern.org. But if they want more information, they want to see our fact sheets, they want to sign up for our monthly email, go to conservativesconcern.org, and they can do it all there quite easily.
Okay. Mark, thank you so much for being on Liberty Talk Radio. We do hope you will accept that invitation to return at a later date. Give us an update.
Absolutely. I'm always ready.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Joe.
it. Folks, this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends. Let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, as my wife would say, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well. Stay tuned.